All right, so we got a quorum. So I was previewing the minutes, but I'll pull up the agenda. We're gonna have a full schedule today, so I'm gonna try to be terser, shorter winded than usual. First of all, any known absences? I know Suzanne couldn't make it. Hannah, anybody else that we know of?
Yes, and then Marissa.
Oh, that's right, Marissa. Well. Okay, and that leads to, well, let's do the land acknowledgement first. Would anybody be willing to just go ahead and read that while I have it up? Brian, I'm going to pick on you because you already started. I heard you can talk, so.
No problem. I was going to ask you to make it bigger. Thank you. Okay. As the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, want to begin this meeting by affirming BPAC's commitment to equity and racial justice. We would like to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on lands that have served as the home for diverse Indigenous communities long before current governments were established here. We pay our respects to the elders and members of these communities, both past and present, and recognize the harms of genocide and colonialism. We will make a conscious effort to reflect on the following questions as we advance through our business and contemplate changes in our community. And we recognize that achieving equity requires our commitment to an ongoing process. How can we seek to repair harm with our work and not erase history? How does our work impact the vulnerability and safety of people who hold many intersecting marginalized identities, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color, people with disabilities, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning people? How can we prioritize and center people in our decision-making? How can we be more responsive to local needs? How can our work build community power and shared decision-making?
Thank you, Brian. All right. So we know Suzanne and Marissa aren't here, and that leads to Marissa is actually a new member, as well as Mary Rose this month. Is that the only two new members we have as of since last month? Is that right, Hannah?
Yes, except for actually just this afternoon, we have a new NCCU liaison. And nice. Yes, and so they'll still have to do the oath and everything like that in the orientation, but they were just appointed last night.
Okay, great. Cool. Yeah, we're filling a lot of slots. And Marissa, she was appointed before she couldn't make this meeting before she was even appointed, so we'll see her next month. But Mary Rose, who's been around to a number of our meetings and a number of our committee meetings already, glad to have you officially a member. I'm going to skip the kind of introductions that we normally do, but feel free to introduce. Maybe everyone can throw in the chat, actually. That would be useful. Just what your role is, how long you've been on BPAC, maybe the committee that you tend to frequent, just so folks kind of know. And if there are guests, feel free to use the Q&A if you can to introduce yourselves.
One other thing is I was able to work with the city's communications department to do a Bull City Today feature on BPAC and the vacancies that we have. So if you all would be willing to share this, we still have 3 vacancies right now. And I'll drop the link in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. We'll share that. And yeah, definitely let folks know that are interested in these issues. More the merrier while we have openings. Maybe I'll just throw in also, while you're putting things in the chat, we have like 4 letters we want to review towards the end of this meeting. Hannah, when you have a moment, if you don't mind sharing those links in the chat, just so folks during the meeting, if they can read through, because I will go through them at the end, but we'll do so pretty quickly. So if you have any chance to review them before we read through them at the end, you might have more comments that come up. Any adjustments to the agenda that we wanted to go over? I know, Hannah, we've been discussing tweaking the agenda. Was there any specific adjustments you wanted to throw out?
Yes, so we're going to have 5 minutes from the public comment period added to the plan implementation, evaluation, and committee report. So there will only be 5 minutes for public comments, and it will be 25 minutes for the committee reports. but
Mhm.
5 of those added for Pi.
Mhm. And public comment, folks, I'm trying to get you there early, so you have a little more than 5 minutes, but we'll do what we can. Any other adjustments to the agenda from anyone else? I guess I can zoom out a little bit to show the rest of it. Not seeing anything. Let me know, because I don't see everybody while I'm sharing, so just let me know if somebody is waving and I can't see them. All right, then we'll move to the minutes. Hopefully folks had a chance to review the minutes from last month, from August. And Brian, I think, had a revision to the minutes, if you want to say those.
Yeah, I noticed I'm listed as present. I was not.
Okay. And I think Dan tried to call in. I don't think he could. This was the same day as a lot of people were having power outages, so during a storm. So
that was my situation as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So for accuracy, we should just note that we'll strike Brian and Dan from present, and any other adjustments or revisions to last month's minutes.
Hey, this is Javiera. I don't know if I get listed on your stuff or not, but I also was not there, did not have power or internet.
Yeah, it was a tough night for a lot of us. We did note that you weren't there, so that at least, for whatever reason, we knew that.
I will own, I do not read your minutes. I keep up with my own.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I think we're happy if we read our own minutes. So thanks, Javier, for that clarity. Any other adjustments to last month's minutes? And if not, I'll take a motion.
This is Brian again. I move we approve last month's minutes.
This is Ed. I'll second.
All right, Brian and Ed, thanks. All in favor of approving the minutes from August with the adjustments that Brian mentioned, just on the
Aye.
with ayes.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
See, I hear ayes. Any opposed? Not hearing. Again, let me know if I'm missing people who are waving, but I'm not seeing anything. So we approve the minutes from August. Thanks, everybody. And we can move to public comments. So for this, we have, I know, one public comment that we'll have from May. And I'll just, before we start on the public comments, I'll say if there are folks who have public comments related to, well, I know Trisha has a public comment, but if folks have public comments related to any other, like any of the Fayetteville bike lane related sort of goings on, let's hold those. We'll do those all together because we have a number of items that are related to that. So any public comments that aren't related to Fayetteville Street, we'll do those now. So does May have access now?
Yes, I'll unmute them, and then also Trisha put in the Q&A that they had a question about the neighborhood traffic circles, and that they would be willing to go after May.
Okay, thanks. I see that now. Yeah, May, if you're available, I think you can unmute yourself.
I just
May,
unmuted them.
Okay, May, if you're available, feel free to speak up, and I can actually go
Okay.
ahead, and if you'd like me to share the document.
Can you hear me?
Yes, May, go ahead.
Oh, great. Okay. Hi, my name is May Grant, and I live in City of Durham at 205 Baines Court. Greetings to our Durham City Council member, Javiera Caballero, Heidi Carter, Durham County Commissioner, and all the members of BPAC. On behalf of the approximately 400 people living in South Point Manor off of Farrington Road and our neighbors, we appeal to you to help us in filling the sidewalk gap in the frontage of city-owned land parcel 143-288, which is used as odor reduction barrier from the adjoining water reclamation facility on the very narrow and busy Farrington Road. As we wrote to you on June 19th, we hope you will become advocates for this very vital and life-saving project and leave a legacy of saving lives, helping the environment and the economy, and gaining the admiration and respect of the people. Farrington Road has a sidewalk from beyond the intersection with North Carolina 54, passing along Carolina Point Plaza, Falcon Bridge Center, crosstown apartments, fire station, and the water reclamation facility. Here, sidewalk stops in frontage of the city-owned land that then restarts along the South Point Manor neighborhood. The frontage of the city land is uneven, muddy, tall weeds, snakes, thorns, and thistles. In order to walk or push a wheelchair or stroller to the clinics or amenities, we must step into the very narrow and busy Farrington Road or back to the traffic to rejoin the sidewalk and risk being killed or maimed. Since last fall, we have continuously brought this issue to the attention of nearly every department in the city without any action. They acknowledge that this is important sidewalk connection, but said the city assigned funding for projects in order of priority in areas within the city corporated limits. In response to how often you get this kind of request, they said this case is the first in my 23 years here and 30 years for another colleague. We asked who is in charge of something like getting this sidewalk assigned. They said there is no who. Why is it critical for the sidewalk to be completed now? The services and resources at Carolina Point Plaza, the Falcon Bridge Center, and the bus stop are many, and less than a mile from hundreds of people living at South Point Manor and beyond. There are multiple health facilities, including children's services of all kinds. Kids could be brought to these clinics in stroller. In addition, there are adult clinics, labs, radiology, physical therapy, and dental care. At Falcon Bridge Center, there are many restaurants, a bowling alley, a gym, a pharmacy, and more. The bus stop at Falcon Bridge and 54 not only would take us to Chapel Hill, but we could go to the library at Alston, the mall, and Duke without adding to air pollution, causing traffic congestion, and adding to parking challenges. Health benefits of walking and running are clear, and the benefits of not driving to the gym are many. Parents could walk their children from South Point Manor and a very large crosstown apartment complex to the preschool at 6804 Farrington Road. None of these and other benefits can be realized until we can walk safely on a continuous sidewalk. In regards to ownership, on August 18, 2023, Ellen Beckman, Director of Transportation at Durham County, responded to whether it is the responsibility of county to fill this sidewalk gap, because even though the land is owned and used by city, it is not incorporated. The response was, like most county governments in North Carolina, Durham County does not have a sidewalk construction or maintenance program. And the city of Durham could annex its own property to eliminate the complications that this parcel is currently outside the municipal limits. And she said construction of this sidewalk would most likely occur if the city prioritizes it for construction and build it voluntarily. In regards to funding, as you know, when building a new building or doing improvement to an existing one, the owner has to install a sidewalk or give money in lieu of, so the city builds the sidewalk. As such, the church facing the gap gave the city $20,280 6 years ago. Our hope is that you help to spend that money to at least shorten the gap rather than give it to some other unrelated project. Also, water reclamation has had huge improvements and upgrades. They are now in phase 2. Surely they also paid in lieu of, and the fund should be spent for the sidewalk in the frontage of the land next to them, which is used as an odor reduction barrier by them. In conclusion, there is already a memorial near the gap for someone who died in a crash. We put all our hope and trust in your hands to help avoid pedestrian tragedies due to this gap. Thank you all for giving us your time and attention.
Thank you, May. I appreciate that. I appreciate your diligence on this issue. I will pause here. First of all, are we looking at the area that you're talking about, May?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you are.
Great.
Yes.
I'll pause and leave for any replies from folks. Yeah. there are any thoughts, I'd be happy to hear them. And I know there's been some discussion on emails, but I think this is also, I guess, May, I'll ask one thing. I know you sent us an email, a letter. Would you like for us to include that in the minutes for this meeting as well?
Sure, or I can send you this presentation and you can put this instead. It's shorter.
Sure, yeah. If you have what you just said in writing, that'd be great. I think we'd be happy to include that in the minute. That would be
We'll
better, I
send
think.
it tonight.
This is Ed. I have just a quick question and one, I want to thank you, really. It's a really well presented statement, and it's a really important concern. I'm curious, you mentioned that the $20,000 was put up. Was that specifically so that a sidewalk could be built?
Correct, because the church was built brand new, and as a brand new building, in order to give permission, you have to put a sidewalk in the frontage of the building. And the church decided that they don't want to do it for some reason, and so they gave the $20,280 instead of them building the sidewalk. The city is supposed to, they have that money to do the sidewalk, but it's 6 years. And the interesting thing is that the church frontage is just the same as church frontage of the city land facing each other. So if they would shorten it, if they would spend that $20,000, it would become much shorter, no sidewalk.
Right, I understand. I imagine the $20,000 is just being held in trust, waiting some disposition.
The writings and the policies at the city are very vague and old. So there is no clear, even one sentence to know what happens to the money. It goes to a sidewalk, perhaps sidewalk fund or something.
Yeah.
But we think they should have their sidewalk because everybody else benefits from it.
Yeah, May, I'd like to say 3 things. One is, I think that the payment in loop system, we also agree, is essentially bad. At least I'll speak for myself, but I think a lot of our BPAC members have said as much, and we might have said so in an official document that we voted on in the past as well. We're hoping that that'll change in the UDO. But yeah, payment in lieu, that money seems to kind of go into the general fund, and it sort of, you're lucky if you get any equivalent value back in terms of that lost sidewalk in 10 years. The second thing is, this is quite similar, I think, to actually in some ways to what Tricia brought up last month. I know you couldn't make it, May, last month, but talking about sidewalks to schools outside of city limits, but within the county. We'll talk more about that later today. So I just want to plug that. Maybe there's a chance to collaborate on that. And the last thing is, I do think that the one thing that BPAC can do here, which is maybe not, I agree that this is an important sidewalk, but I think the most actionable item for BPAC would be to ask for clarity on how these sidewalks get prioritized, to see a list of what the sidewalks priority is multiple years out. I know Brian Taylor is working hard on that, sort of surfacing that information, but it's just something that I think BPAC will hopefully be able to take on in the next month or two to talk more about. And we'll talk about that at the upcoming PI meeting. I do want to move on. Yeah, any last comments about this?
Just regarding schools, there is also a preschool on that road that, as I mentioned, people from there's a very large apartment complex and South Point Manor. They could walk their children to the preschool.
Yeah, man.
So we have everything. We have buses, preschools, everything we need and is there, and it's part of what the city says, but everything is diagnosed, but no treatment yet.
Thank you, May.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, and Ideal, just in the chat, for what it's worth, mentions, I believe that Public Works may have a say on whether this is on their list to build. So something we will talk about at the next PI meeting, which will be the first Thursday of next month. May, we will make sure you're invited to that as well.
Thank you.
If Trisha, if you have a quick comment, I'd love to take it in, and then we can, just a couple minutes late, hand it over to Brandon. But Trisha, if you don't mind, I can take a couple minutes for your comment.
Yeah, so just wanted to add a separate issue than what we're talking about later. Neighborhood traffic circles, these are something that you all recommend in various developments and the like, but it's something that the city currently doesn't allow in new developments. I live next to a new community that's being built, and you all BPAC recommended a neighborhood traffic circle, but the city basically said, well, fire doesn't like them, so we won't allow it. And then when I got fire on board, they said, oh, well, actually Public Works doesn't like them. So they denied it, even though the developer was willing to do it. The two reasons I got were, one, that the city needs to show that there's a need. And if it's a new street, you can't show that there's a need. Basically, people haven't been hurt or killed yet. So that's not great. How do we implement prevention into our planning and with developers' money? And the other piece was Public Works came in and said they're too messy to clean up. But recently the city has started a neighborhood bike routes project. I put it in the Q&A, the link to it, because I can't access the chat, where they're implementing neighborhood traffic circles throughout different neighborhoods in Durham. And I had the developer of this neighborhood, because it's still under construction, reach out to the city to say, hey, since you all are now allowing these circles, can we put one in? And they basically said, oh no, we're still not allowing them for new neighborhoods, despite the fact that they're being constructed with city dollars. So wanted to put this out there. I don't know if that's a UDO issue, because it's not allowed unless there's a need, or if it's something to take up with the city, but just wanted to get it all on everyone's radar.
Yeah, thanks, Trisha. Yeah, I remember you mentioning the neighborhood bike routes. Looking into traffic circles, hopefully we'll get on the same page and actually start implementing them soon. But yeah, it'll be definitely in, whether it's UDO or whatever, we'll keep pushing for that. Thank you. Any other public comments? So please mention in the Q&A if a non-panelist has a public comment. I'll wait a moment. Not seeing anything. Okay. Brandon is here from NCDOT. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for sending that presentation ahead of time. We'll hand it off to you.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm gonna try to share my screen, see if I can get this to work. Are you seeing the presentation?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, great. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I think this invite came from Council Member Caballero after a presentation to the Leesville Road community earlier in the year. So she asked I come and do a similar presentation to this group. So thanks for having me. Glad to be in front of you tonight. My name is Brandon Jones, the Division 5 engineer. I've got almost 28 years with NCDOT. Okay. Just talk a little bit about how roads are maintained in North Carolina. If you don't know, we have a large publicly maintained road network. Most of those are state maintained. We don't have a county maintained system in North Carolina. So you can see the breakdown of the state maintained roadways between primary system, which is your NC routes, US routes, interstate routes, and our very large secondary system. And then you have municipal systems, some federal roads, and other state agencies might maintain roads in parks and things like that. So we don't have county maintained roads in North Carolina. We're the 9th most populated state, but we have the 2nd largest state maintained network in the country, next to Texas. And we've typically been kind of neck and neck as far as those mileages. They've always seemed to stay a little bit ahead of us in the mileage. So across the state, NCDOT is broken into 14 different transportation divisions. You can see Division 5 in the upper center in an orange shade. It covers 7 counties: Wake, Durham, Person, Granville, Vance, Warren, and Franklin counties. I was born and raised in Wake County. Lived in Wake County my entire life, spent most of my career in Division 5. I left Division 5 back in 2015 and went down to Division 8, and I was division engineer down there for about 5.5 years before coming back to Division 5 about 2.5 years ago. So I mentioned the counties that are in Division 5. That's our road miles and lane miles. We have 544 employee positions in the county, just like in the division, excuse me. And just like everyone else, we are facing pretty severe workforce issues. We have about a 34% vacancy, especially in Durham and Wake in the urban areas. That vacancy rate's a little bit higher, and that's everything from skilled labor to engineering positions and everything in between. So fun facts, we have a very large maintained network in Division 5, larger than the states that are listed there. And then there's 3 states listed that are less than Wake County. Wake County has the largest state maintained network in the state by far. Guilford's second, followed by Johnson County. So how is DOT funded? So you see a breakdown here of the state funding, which is typically about 73% of our overall funding, made up from motor fuel tax, highway use tax, DMV fees, some general fund that comes to us, and then federal funding. But a big part of this is motor fuel tax. And one thing that should interest all of you is how transportation is funded. And the fact that motor fuel tax is not confident in that being able to meet our needs moving forward with more fuel efficient vehicles. And it just makes sense that we need to come up with alternative revenue sources. How a road gets built, that's a long process. It starts with long range planning, and a big part of that long range planning is our planning organizations across the state, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Council member Caballero is part of the DCHC Metropolitan Planning Organization sits on that board, so very influential in decision making on the future of transportation in the area. It starts with long range planning. This is decades out. It goes from an unfiscally constrained plan to what's called a Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which is typically about a 3-decade plan that's fiscally constrained. So you project out revenues and try to line up the needs of the transportation system with those revenues. Typically from a Metropolitan Transportation Plan is where projects get submitted into DOT's prioritization process. We started a prioritization process before 2010. STI law became in effect in 2013 that told us how to fund projects. But they go through a prioritization process. I can submit projects. The planning organizations can submit projects. We're going through project submittals right now to prepare for the 2026 to 2035 10-year transportation improvement program, which will not be finalized until 2 years from now. So it takes a while to go through the submittal process, go through the scoring of those projects, and then involve the local input scoring as well, which I'll talk about in a minute. So if a project does get funded, it goes through project development phase. It goes through environmental studies, gets the more detailed design of the project. We try to minimize the impacts both to the environment and to the human environment and natural environment. Then we get into pretty stringent designs and acquiring right-of-way, moving utilities, and then actually building the project itself. And then we maintain and operate the facilities. That's typically from a road standpoint. If you take some of the bicycle and pedestrian projects we have in the STIP, some of that lifespan of the project's a little bit shorter, but they go through pretty much the same type of process from a planning, design, sometimes moving utilities, buying right-of-way, construction, and the maintenance of those facilities typically fall with the locals. So let's talk about the planning organizations across the state. Durham is all of Durham County is part of the Durham, Chapel Hill, Carrboro Metropolitan Planning Organization. And you can see the breakdown across the state here in this map. Part of Orange County is in DCHC, as well as Northeast Chatham County. You can see it borders the capital area MPO. So it's, transportation around this area functions as a region. So there's a lot of coordination between the capital area MPO and the Durham Chapel Hill Carrboro MPO. Other planning organizations across the state, there, I think if you're in a metropolitan area of 50,000 population, you're required to have an MPO. So that changes sometimes with the 10-year census. Other areas in the state are part of rural planning organizations. So I mentioned earlier in 2013, the legislature passed the Strategic Transportation Investments Law. That pretty much outlined how transportation projects across the state are funded. And these are your large capital projects. So how it's supposed to work is a 10-year plan. You're probably familiar with our 10-year state transportation improvement program. It's broken into 22 different funding buckets, 3 different funding regions. So you have a statewide mobility, which is 40% of the overall dollars, regional impact, which is 30%, and the division needs, which is 30%. So this is a listing, won't go through each one of these categories of what type of project qualifies for which funding category. But if you quickly go to bike, pedestrian, and most of you are probably familiar with this, those projects do not qualify for statewide funding or regional funding. It all falls into the division needs category, which is a very, very competitive bucket. That does not exclude bicycle and pedestrian improvements from statewide projects or regional projects as part of our complete streets policy. So once projects are reviewed, they receive quantitative scores. So they're dumped in the bucket, receive the quantitative scores, we get the scores. Those projects that are eligible for statewide funding are 100% quantitative driven from a scoring process. And based on where the 40% of the funds run out, depends on when we cut off the statewide projects. If a statewide project does not make that 40% funding, it gets to cascade down and compete at the regional level. And then at the regional level, and then at the division needs level, the planning organization and the division engineer can put what's called local input points on the projects. And so we coordinate heavily with the planning organizations to make sure at the end of the day, we want to get projects funded. So we coordinate a lot of times on who's putting what points on what projects to make sure we have the most competitive project we can get from a scoring standpoint. So what's happened over the last few years? We just adopted the 24 to 2033 Transportation Improvement Program. We typically do that every 2 years. However, our previous one was our 2020 to 2029 TIP. We ended up skipping our 2022 to 2031 TIP. And that's because we started seeing such increased cost in not only new projects, ongoing projects, but future project cost estimates. As we were updating those, everything was skyrocketing. You take what you've seen just in inflation and your general expenses that you may have personally, they've been even greater in the highway construction industry. So it's just kind of a snapshot of what we've gone through over the last few years, the rolling construction cost index. So we had to push the pause button, and we delayed doing the STIP until this last adoption. Now, what we found was we were about $12 billion over programmed with the projects that were in the 2020 to 2029 STIP based on increased cost. All right, so there's a lot of work that went into the 2024 to 2033 STIP, a lot of coordination with the planning organizations across the state. We had a lot of movements in project schedules. Some projects completely dropped out of the STIP. You think about a fiscally constrained program or fiscally constrained budget, and cost increases on each line item. Basically, each project could be a line item. You can't keep the same number in there. I will tell you that bike ped projects, for the most part, were very successful in staying in the program and staying up front in the program. So this is just a snapshot of our transportation improvement program map for 2024 to 2033. And you can see the color codes to the left in the legend of what colors mean what type of project and what tier, like statewide, regional, or division. And then the pinkish tone is the division bicycle and pedestrian projects. Talk about complete streets. So we had a pretty major change in our complete streets policy back in 2019. It basically required a lot more from NCDOT as far as delivering and paying for pedestrian facilities on our network when we do major projects. Actually, we do a lot of different types of projects, if possible. But definitely when we're doing our major projects, it changed how we're evaluating these projects for facilities to include, and also changes how we were paying for those. Instead of a lot of betterments that we used to have in the past, we started paying for a lot more of the improvements. So this is a snapshot of the DCHC MPO webpage. Other ways bicycle and pedestrian improvements get funded are through the MPOs. And so they get a special amount of our division tier funding that go directly to the MPOs, and the MPOs develop their own locally administered project program. DCHC, I think, puts quite a majority, if not all of their dollars into bicycle and pedestrian type of improvements, maybe some transit improvements, but mostly it's non-highway type of improvements. That is their call. They get to make that decision with those dollars. They get to ask for project submittals from their members, and then have their own prioritization process for scoring and eventually funding those projects. And then the delivery of those projects is also up to the local government as well. So this is just an example of one that's listed in the STIP on the map. EB 5514 is a typical description of a TIP project. This is a route on NC 751, University Drive, from Garrett to Cornwallis, is adding bicycle lanes and pedestrian improvements. Moving on to a major highway project that's been in the STIP for several years is US 70 upgrade in Durham. So it starts at the Wake County line and goes to basically where East End Connector I-885 ties into US 70. It was upgrading the roadway to a freeway facility, which means it's all control of access. It means you don't have any driveways. All your intersections are grade separated, served by interchanges, things like that. We had developed two different alternatives for U5720 as a freeway. On the Wake County side, there's a project called U5518, which is moving forward as a freeway conversion project from 540 to the county line. As a matter of fact, that's probably going to be moving forward and going under construction in the next 5 years. So U5720 started the 2020 STIP with funding for right-of-way and utilities that was set for 2024 and in construction in 2027. So it's what we called a committed status at the time. And a lot of those statuses changed because of how we had to shift schedules in creating the 24 to 2033 STIP. So it fell out of that committed status. So going back to long-range transportation plans, I know it sounds like I'm jumping around a little bit, but it's kind of bringing you back to how we got to this point with U5720. The previous Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the 2045 plan, still showed US 70 as a freeway facility with interchanges at Miami, and I think 2 other interchanges along the corridor. That's just how it was labeled, going from 4 lanes to 6 lanes. And earlier last year, the MPO adopted the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and changed a number of the projects in the area. So US 70, for example, went from going from a 4-lane to 6-lane freeway facility to staying as a 4-lane boulevard facility with at-grade intersections. So no widening, just modernizing the corridor. There was questions on what that might look like. So the MPO started a corridor study for US 70. I think they've had about 4 public engagements so far for this corridor study. And it's kind of showing the public what the corridor might look like as a boulevard, what type of travel times might be gained from creating the boulevard. But it was really based on the MPO board decision to have a boulevard instead of a freeway. So U5720 as a freeway is still competing for inclusion in the 26 to 2035 STIP. We'll get that scoring next year to see how it scores. But the outcome of the corridor study could lead to modifications to the project and impact how the project is scored in that prioritization cycle. So it's kind of going hand in hand with our scoring process and prioritization process, the completion of the corridor study by the MPO. Other projects in the area, I-85, adding lanes between Midland Terrace and Red Mill Road. It's currently an unfunded project, so it will recompete for scoring in the next STIP. With those projects with the asterisk, meaning that the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan conflicts with what's proposed for that section of roadway. So you see I-885 at the bottom, U5934. That project is to add lanes and rehab pavement. That construction is set to begin in 2029. We have recently coordinated with the MPO to have an amendment to their 2050 MTP to incorporate transit priority for that widening project. And then NC 98, which has been high on the city's list for quite a while, U6120, the widening of NC 98 from Junction to Lynn, basically adding that median to provide a safer corridor, adding the bicycle lanes, the sidewalks, transit stop improvements, and traffic signals. That goes to construction in 2029. And then I already talked about U5720. We have a lot of rail projects. If you listen closely to transportation conversations in the Wake Durham region, rail is high on the conversation pieces for a lot of reasons. Trying to establish some type of intra-city rail connections with more frequent trips between places like Raleigh and Durham could be an important part of the future transportation in the area. Recently, NCDOT's added another train to our Raleigh to Charlotte corridor, which includes Durham in that stop. So we have more trains running currently between Raleigh and Charlotte. But I think what we're talking about locally is how do we get even more trains running between Durham and Raleigh, and maybe even up to like Wake Forest and over to Clayton. Those conversations are ongoing. But this is one to create grade separations. An important piece of moving trains swiftly along corridors is not having at-grade intersections. Durham's probably one of the most challenging areas because of how long the infrastructure has been in place, the impacts that come along with making some of the grade separations, especially when you get closer to downtown. But this is one that's coming up in a few years, is grade separating Ellis and Glover, closing off the Wren and realigning Wren. This is an example of other smaller type of projects that we typically deliver, are highway safety improvement or highway mobility projects. So this is a couple that we have in the Durham area. This is widening of NC 98 at Lynn Road, adding that left turn lane in each direction. And then we have a spot mobility project at 98 in Mineral Springs for right turn lanes on Mineral Springs. That's coming up in April of 2024. So how else do roadway improvements happen? We do coordinate with developments that are coming in and developers for improvements being done by developers. The city takes a strong lead in that. Durham, I think, does a pretty decent job when it comes to getting ahead of this at the rezoning period. Not all jurisdictions touch this at time of rezoning. Sometimes it's during site plan review, but Durham does lay out requirements and reviews traffic impacts at times of rezoning. So an example of this is the additional left turn lane on eastbound US 70 onto Leesville Road. Also, the construction of Northern Durham Parkway through Brightleaf. And that is the end of my presentation. I know there's probably some question and answers not necessarily related specifically to the presentation that some of you may have. I'd be glad to take those at this time.
Brandon, thank you so much. I appreciate that presentation and you coming here. Ideal expressed in the chat as well. Thanks for coming. But I will leave it out now, sort of a moment for folks that have questions. I have a couple of my own, but I'll sort of leave some space for others to speak up. And if folks want to raise their hand on Zoom, I'm happy to queue up that way. But if anybody has a question they want to start with, I can leave it to you all. Ed has a hand up. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, hi there. Thank you for the presentation. I'm curious, how does NCDOT, when it's assessing these projects, view things through a disability lens, access to people with various disabilities? And is there anything more than minimal compliance with ADA standards that is taken into account?
I don't know if I can speak on anything more than minimal compliance. I'm not sure I can specifically differentiate between minimal and what would be above minimal. I think that might be subjective, but I don't know. But yeah, part of our requirements when we do bicycle and pedestrian, or just really looking at pedestrian, is we do have ADA guidelines that we do follow for those improvements. Retrofitting certain areas is the biggest challenge when it comes to that. We have a pretty large program that's federally funded to retrofit wheelchair ramps, those access ramps across the state. I think we've got over 1,000 that are under contract in our division. So typically you're taking and bringing the ramps up as close as we can to current design standards from ADA standpoint. Some of those are more challenging than others to make that happen, because there's not a lot of money there to add to if we need to move drainage or move utilities or buy a right of way. So that's a challenge. But on new projects where right of way is a typical part of that project, then yeah, that's, we do what we need to make that happen. Another thing that we've really tried to improve on over the last decade is in our work zones, where we have work zones in urban areas, making sure that the plans call for how are we going to accommodate blind pedestrians, things like that, through the work zones. Those can be challenging as well.
Yeah, they certainly can. That's really an important thing to take into account. To what extent, if any, is outreach done? Like, does NCDOT actively reach out to communities of people with disabilities to make determinations as to whether or not this type of intersection design is appropriate or this type of modification is appropriate?
That's a good question. I know standards are developed that we try to follow, but then when it gets into a specific location, I think we rely on the public review and public comment process and reaching out to the locals on that to make sure we're incorporating and trying to engage as many members of the public as we can. I'm not sure that on every project we reach out to a specific group that would focus on this and let them review each project.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you. Whenever outreach is done, the means of the outreach can be critical to you may not specifically target a community of people with disabilities, but they may be precluded from accessing the outreach if, for instance, it's only provided in a singular format that may not be accessible to everyone. So something to think about.
Very good point.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ed. Just for the record, I misread the messages. Javier was thanking you, Brandon. Ideal sent a message right before, but we're all thanking you. Mary, you had your hand up.
Hi, yeah. I'm not sure if you would actually know the answer to this question, but you brought up the additional routes on the Piedmont train service, and I was wondering if you knew whether or not there is a plan to bring back the stops that were removed from some of the routes. I know that's been a concern for some people in Durham who regularly commute to Burlington in the morning and then come back in the evening, and they can no longer do that. So I was just wondering if you knew any information on that, or if there were any plans to improve that service.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, the recent change I think just happened earlier this summer with the additional route. So I think that's what you're speaking of, where that route doesn't have all the same stops as the previous routes. Is that right?
Yeah, so they moved some of the routes around to fit in the second or the fifth route for each direction.
Okay.
But the existing morning route and existing evening route previously had like Burlington High Point as stops, and then I believe another route had Annapolis, somewhere else near Charlotte on the route. And so there's been concerns about sorry, there's a person singing loudly on a microphone outside my house. But there were concerns about people who used to take that route in the morning to get to Burlington and no longer can. And I've been impacted by that trying to go to High Point before in the morning. So yeah, I just didn't know if there are any plans to bring those stops back on that route.
I don't know of any changes based on the current schedule that are upcoming.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Landon, have your hand up. And just before I hand it to Landon, if folks who are in the guests list, you feel free to throw in the Q&A, and if you want to ask your question with your voice, we can give you the mic as well. Landon, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks, Brandon, for the presentation. That was super helpful, especially on the funding allocation and how they compete. That was super helpful. Question: you had mentioned NCDOT has made enhancements, especially in highway work zones, for the actual highway construction workers there in order to provide a greater degree of protection. Could you expand upon what those enhancements have been, or what, like, because I mean, I've kind of noticed a little bit of that, but I was curious as to like what changes have been made there.
Well, especially on our major, high-speed facilities, a lot of times those are some of our riskier work zones. Visibility and speed are key. So how do we slow down drivers through the work zones? And slowing down drivers these days is, I think, more challenging than it's ever been. So what we are finding is it's typically the best presence to have out there is a blue light. Nothing does that more than a police presence, but that is because of workforce issues. That's becoming more challenging to get that commitment from law enforcement to be in as many active work zones as we have going on at any given time. So there are things we're working through with the contractors agency and through the General Assembly, because some of the things require statute allowances to be able to. How do we allow contractors or law enforcement to set up roadside blue lights They wouldn't be patrol cars, they wouldn't be officers, but roadside blue lights in our work zones, and potentially even move those. Other things, we have variable speed limits that we use often now in our work zones, where if work's taking place, the speed limit is one thing, which is lower than normal speed limit. But visibility is the key. Temporary work zones are challenging because you're usually setting those up in one evening and taking them back down. And a lot of our work now is nighttime. Construction in this area is pretty much a 24/7 operation. We got something going on all the time, it seems like. So nighttime visibility with light plants that are greatly improved to not distract drivers, but still provide the workers the light and light up the area. Pavement markings through pavement markings can be challenging too, because there's limited pavement marking contractors, but making sure we're using like raised reflectors when we have shifts that have going on, to make sure people can see those shifts at night. That's just a few things, Landon. List.
Yeah, the kind of the thing I was because in a lot of these zones you see a lot of things like Jersey barriers, right? Jersey barriers, very narrow lanes, and I'm sure that helps as well. And I think this will kind of continue into someone else's later line of questioning, but I was kind of curious, is there, since a lot of those types of methods also help slow down and make those areas safer for those people who are outside of their vehicles, is there any consideration for the use of similar type measures in high pedestrian areas where North Carolina DOT is in charge of the design and the construction of both vehicular and pedestrian facilities?
I think you do see in certain areas the use of barriers as that positive barrier between traffic and pedestrians. Sometimes it's water filled barriers versus the concrete barriers, because concrete barriers are very bulky, they take up more room. So oftentimes you might see a water filled barrier that's used in those situations. That's a lot of it's depending on the speed and how close the pedestrians might be to the traffic itself.
Right.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different criteria that go into what you can use and when to use it.
Right. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks, Landon.
Yeah.
I'll piggyback off that a little bit too, and if folks feel free to chime in or raise your hand again. But that does kind of makes me wonder a little bit about, like, does the DOT have? Do you all have like some structured way of thinking about like vehicle speeds where they intersect with pedestrians, right? You're saying like maybe like, is there an expected turn speed, right? Like at a lighted, like if they're making a right turn at an intersection and the DOT is repaving that road, is there like a goal speed that you think cars can, like it's safe at certain speeds, unsafe at certain speeds, with the expectation that with some probability, right, pedestrians will step out, like accidents, like, or unintentional sort of crossings will happen, and like, and to reduce sort of injury and death. Is there a sort of criteria that's used for where cars interact with bicycles and pedestrians, that's taken into account at intersections, for example?
In a temporary work zone, I'm not sure that is done like that, especially with like a resurfacing project. I think it's case by case depending on the area. The closest thing I can think of is what we've coordinated recently with the city of Raleigh, and looking at how pedestrians and bicyclists are moving, and mostly pedestrians in the downtown area.
Yeah.
Is incorporating things like leading pedestrian intervals, which allow the pedestrian to get out in the lane prior to the vehicular traffic getting a green light. So we've incorporated that a lot. Some no turn on reds as well in downtown Raleigh have been incorporated, and they're looking at other type of improvements as well to shorten some of the crosswalk distances with bump outs and things. But going back to work zones, I don't know of any type of ideal speed that would be set for that.
No, and my question I didn't mean to make it specific to work zones. I was thinking more generally about, and I think you're referencing the spot safety sort of projects that you've done in Raleigh. Is that what those are called? Yeah.
So yeah, well, some of that's utilizing different funding sources, and and the city of Raleigh's got funding in that as well. But yeah, and spot safety is a competitive statewide funding that's based on a benefit type cost ratio. And we usually fund those projects quarterly. So we're constantly working with our regional traffic engineers and local municipal engineers to look at issues in those areas to submit projects for safety improvements.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Javier, I'll pass it to you, and I'll follow up after that.
Yeah, mine are fast. Brandon, I don't know if you shared the slides that you did at the presentation. Could you send them to Hannah so that she can then pass them on to the whole group? Because I think it would be helpful for conversations in general.
Sure.
And then I do want to note that for us in Durham, it's really competitive because we are with Raleigh, right? So Division 5, we really, it from a funding perspective, it's just really challenging. And then the last thing, and I probably just already lost it. Oh, well, maybe it'll come back to me. I just wanted to say thank you for being here. And I think this is going to help prompt a lot of conversation moving forward about how BPAC can advocate in certain spaces that maybe there isn't advocacy right now because there's just not awareness of where to advocate. So thanks.
And one thing I'll add, I mentioned that I meant to add it earlier, is project submittals for the next round of the STIP that's ongoing right now. So there's close coordination with DCHC. We can submit. The divisions can only submit 14 projects per mode. I think DCHC can submit almost double that. So for instance, when it comes to bicycle pedestrian projects, typically there's more than DCHC can submit that they want to submit. So we'll submit those projects on behalf of them. Basically, we usually take those cues from the locals for those type of projects. So I think, Javier, we just looked at the last DCHC meeting where I think there was 44 bicycle pedestrian projects that were entertained for submittal, and I think 39 of the 44 are actually being submitted for scoring.
Yeah, now, I unfortunately missed the last the last MPO meeting, but that did help bring up two questions. Well, one thing is that the nice thing about our MPO is that Orange County folks are in a different division, so we're not competing against each other, and that is helpful. Because otherwise it would be even harder than it is. So that's one thing that's good for us. And then secondly, Brandon, you don't need to answer this now because I'm looking at time. But when you mentioned the 3 counties with the most roads, is Mecklenburg not on that because of their landmass, or is it because Charlotte has taken so many of their own roads?
Yeah, so Mecklenburg is actually 28th when it comes to road mileage in the state. They have less than 1,000 miles of state maintained roads. Mecklenburg is a smaller county, so I think that's just by landmass itself, but it's so incorporated from a municipality standpoint. The municipality maintains a lot of the local roads.
Yeah, and I do want to flag that because 2 years ago, I had a really fascinating conversation with somebody in their transportation department. So they do transportation bonds every 2 years, and they've got it mapped out. They're general obligation bonds, so that goes to the voters, but it's within their package. It's what prompted this whole conversation around an infrastructure bond. And what they've been able to do is that Raleigh does a better job in Durham too, but Charlotte over time, and this is like 50 years that they've been doing these transportation bonds. That's how long, but they own a massive percentage of their roads, which means that when they're coordinating bike and ped, they're not necessarily having to coordinate with NCDOT. And then in a way, it's like just taking it off NCDOT responsibility, which obviously is overcapacity if you look at what their work is, right? And their funding mechanisms. So I just want to highlight that as a really big opportunity. That's a long-term project. I mean, if it's taken Mecklenburg County 50 years, that just tells you what we're talking about. But at some point, there has to be a shift And then the last thing, Brandon, I'm going to stop talking, is I would love to understand. My understanding is we can swap roads. Like it doesn't, like we could give you a road that maybe we don't want to maintain, or it's not. And then there's a more vital link in our transportation network. And somebody highlighted that to me recently as an option. And so just was curious about if that's true or not, because that's what I was told.
We can. So we can relinquish maintenance of roadways to the city and vice versa. Yeah, so that happens occasionally. Sometimes it's just cleaning up segments of roadways that have been built at different times, or for some reason are not part of our system. But yeah, that's always a possibility. And some of these issues we run into with Fayetteville Street and things like that. That's a little bit different because we really need to be focused on different operations there. But those are examples that if the city maintained that roadway, they would have more freedom with what to do with it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Javiera. I have a question from the Q&A from Aspen, and then Mary and Nathan, I'll come to you after that. So Aspen says, and I'll ask a sort of part B to this. Building off Javiera's comment, what is the best way to request bike or pedestrian improvements on an NCDOT road, especially on a road that is not a current project? And then my sort of part B is going to be that, is there a design or is there some scenario that is easier to get these projects approved? Is there some kind of in this cookie cutter situation, you can get NCDOT approval pretty consistently? But first to Aspen's, how should we ask for new projects?
Yeah, it's difficult. I always say start, especially with bicycle and pedestrian projects, start with the locals. You want to make sure first that the locals are on board with what the request is, and then we can coordinate. There's got to be some type of priority set, because there's going to be a lot more requests and really a lot more needs than we can fund. So there's no magic way to make sure you get one funded, because it's going to be competing with a lot of other needs. But for instance, the STIP process, which comes around every 2 years, and even then, projects aren't always at the front. Sometimes they're at the tail end of that 10 years. So it's not always a quick turnaround. I think the key in an MPO area is through their LAP program. I mean, that's where DCHC chooses to spend their LAP money is on bicycle and pedestrian improvements. Mm-hmm. So I think that's your quicker opportunity to get that done. But that really becomes the locals to prioritize.
Is there is there a sort of place where we could go once we've corralled locals and support STIP? I understand. Is there maybe some way that we can a portal or some place where we can log our interest in a specific project?
I don't know if there's a continuous place where you can just log at any given time. The MPO with their LAP program does take a call for projects. But once again, start with that local level. That the local jurisdiction should be putting together a list of priorities. I don't know that what Durham uses to do that, or how they incorporated public comments at any given time to analyze. But when it comes time for the MPO to ask for projects to be submitted, that's when they rely on their members to make those submittals, and those submittals should be based on some type of priority locally. Yeah,
thank you, Brent. Lane, I believe Lane Purse has their hand up. Okay, you can unmute. Go ahead, Lane, whenever you're able.
I just unmuted them, but maybe circle around to someone else and then come back at the end.
Sounds good. Let us know, Lane, if you're able to unmute. Mary, you can go ahead.
Hi. I had a few questions, pretty much just in regards to funding. So you mentioned the competitiveness of the SPOT program, and I'm wondering, are there any initiatives by NCDOT to reduce the competitiveness by increasing the budget for those SPOT programs and allowing more projects to be funded regularly? And then along the lines of that, are there ways in which NCDOT is increasing their non-highway budget specifically for bike and ped projects or any other non-car infrastructure projects?
Yeah, so the way our overall STIP funding works is 90% of the funding has to go to highway projects across the state. And then there's been typically a 4% non-highway, 6% or 6% non-highway, 4% flex. That's just been changed through this last prioritization cycle as we are developing 26 to 2035 STIP. It's changing that flex amount. It's still 90% goes to highway projects, but it increases the ability for the non-highway projects. Now, I will add that a lot of people think of non-highway as bike ped, but non-highway is also rail. It's also aviation. Most of our non-highway funding goes to rail projects. If you think about what's expensive with projects, it's rail projects. But really, what you got to keep your eyes on is the revenue that we're receiving. Last year, we did, the legislature did pass a transfer of sales tax for transportation goods from the general fund to NCDOT fund, which helps boost up the overall 10-year program, of which a certain percent has to go to non-highway projects. I think most non-highway improvements come through highway projects. Through our Complete Streets program, it's going to be we're still in the early stages of really implementing projects that have gone through the Complete Streets analysis and design. But I think that's going to be the biggest area for opportunity in getting improvements made.
So sort of a follow-up, has there been any push or initiatives from NCDOT to reduce that 90%, to allow more localized funding or to allow more public transit funding, like through the train system, just to make traveling across the state more accessible to everybody instead of just those who have cars?
Yeah, once again, it's statute driven,
Okay.
but it's something that comes up every cycle, every prioritization cycle. It's reviewed. Your urban areas like Durham are the ones that can be pushing the hardest. But remember that the statutes covering the entire state, so that can be a challenge. Especially rural areas that are growing, that are seeing needs for highway projects, don't have the same. They don't have the same transit and bike ped demands that an urban area like Durham has. That's where it can be challenging. My advice is don't rely on us. You want to take and control as much of your own destiny when it comes to that as you can. So, council member making the comment earlier about looking at potential for transportation bonds, things like that, other types of revenue that can go directly to the city, to go directly to your area, and you get to choose how those funds are used, is what I would suggest. Try to incorporate as much of that as possible into the ability to deliver what you want.
I guess this isn't really a question, but my understanding was that most of the funding for any sort of transportation project first funnels through NCDOT as opposed to going directly to local governments to manage the funding.
Well, local governments can establish their own transportation bonds, and that money would not flow through NCDOT. That would go directly from the bond to the local government to spend. Any money that flows from a state standpoint or a federal standpoint does flow through us typically. There is some transit money. For instance, the city of Raleigh's Bus Rapid Transit, they have received money directly from the Federal Transit Authority. That goes directly to them. A lot of times that funnels through us. In this case, they have been successful in just dealing directly with the FTA on some of that funding. But typically in what we're talking about here, yeah, a lot of that does funnel through us. The money that goes directly to the MPO for the LAP program is federal dollars. It does flow through us. We are responsible for oversight of that program. So we have people that work with the municipality from making sure that it's done properly, the contracts are set up properly, the contractors are paid properly, things like that, just to account for the federal dollars.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brandon. So I know where we're a little behind on time. Just noting, I know Hannah, you were going to say it. Brandon's presentation was included in the email to BPAC members. If folks not on BPAC would like a copy, please let us know in the Q&A. And then last call for raised hands. Landon, I saw you can go after Nathan. Nathan, go ahead.
Hi. So a lot of times getting better bike and ped infrastructure on roads that are controlled by NCDOT gets shot down because it will negatively affect the level of service, which from what I understand is a guess about how many cars might be going through an area in 20 years. Does NCDOT have any plans to add bikes and peds to that guess, given their commitments to Vision Zero and complete streets? Does NCDOT have any actual like bike and pedestrian KPIs that it's going to start regularly using to try to meet either of those objectives? Or is it all just cars?
No, when we're developing our own projects, right, the highway projects, part of our complete streets policy looks at not only if the facility is identified in a plan, an established plan, but we've also gone a little bit deeper into looking at areas that might have a future need. So we do often project out what those needs are. So our complete streets policy has taken it another step further, that you don't just have to have a plan that's been adopted, that's gone through a public process with that adoption, to have your facility included in our complete streets policy. We're actually looking at the need in certain areas, even if it's not a identified plan or adopted plan. I'm not sure if that answered specifically what you're talking about, Nathan, but it's more than just an adopted plan. We are trying to take some other local input of certain areas that, let's say it's not developed today, but it's pretty imminent that it's going to be developed. So go back to that Ellis Road rail project, Ellis Road, Glover. Some of those areas around there are not developed, but we know they are going to be developed in the future. So what we've done is try to make sure that the project can incorporate the needed facilities, even if it's not built with the project. Make sure that the project's not excluding them from being built.
Yeah, I'd like to just, Jeff, sorry, I'll just ask a follow-up real quick. I think one other way of putting Nathan's question is about sort of thinking about level of service, right? And this sort of idea of congestion for cars. And when we're concerned that maybe taking one lane away from cars will add to car congestion, though it will provide a lane for cyclists, right? So I guess one question is, do you sort of consider bicycles in this level of service? Like when a lane is created, a lot of local trips, maybe not today, but maybe in 10 years or in 20 years, may be taken by bicycle that wouldn't have been, or would have been taken by car. And the sort of, as you're well aware, of course, like the space efficiency of a bicycle lane is much more than that of a car lane. And is that considered in the sort of 20-year projections for level of service? Yeah, I think that's another sort of way of framing it.
I think it could be. I'm not sure if it automatically is, but I think could be part of the argument that could be made. The case could be made.
But that's not part of your current projections, it sounds like.
Well, we're not always the ones. Let's just take, for instance, if the city's requesting us to change a corridor, reduce the vehicular lanes to establish bike lanes, they show us the operational analysis for that. We review that operational analysis. Maybe in some outside cases, it could be made that the bicyclists are going to dominate vehicular traffic, and maybe in some cases it does make sense to where you would weigh that higher than vehicular traffic. But in other cases, for instance, Fayetteville Street, when you're talking about an interchange area with the Durham Freeway and the potential backups that could really create other safety issues and other operational issues, that's when we have typically drawn the line and said, we can't just change that current footprint to incorporate the bike ped improvements because of how it does affect vehicular traffic.
And just one last follow-up, and then I will defer. But then is the sort of, you mentioned sort of safety as a concern for congestion, but I guess one thing that we often think about here on BPAC is with vehicle speed, we know there's a correlation of like higher speed, higher like more life cost, right? The crashes are more deadly, both to people in cars and those outside of cars. So in some sense, we're not so afraid of congestion, right? In the sense that we think that actually it may be safer to be congested sometimes, right? Does NCDOT consider like sort of the life cost when you think about the different level of service on a roadway, right? An average speed of 20 miles an hour versus 30, where folks are crossing the street.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you're right. Speeds have a major issue as far as when you do have an incident, the result of that incident. That could be definitely a room for improvement in how these things are evaluated. There's not a one size fits all in each case. I think that we don't want traffic backing up onto a freeway facility that's currently a freeway facility. I think in the future of NC 147 through downtown Durham, that will be looked at to see if there's other alternatives besides just having a freeway there. But backing up traffic down ramps and things like that, I understand from a congestion standpoint, can be seen as slowing down traffic, safer for bicyclists, but there could be some other impacts as well that could be greater in volume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think we would say that vehicle operation should be ignored. Getting cars through
the balance
of some sort, of course. Yeah, but I think life is something that we obviously put first. Jeff, go ahead, and I'm aware of time. I'll make up for it.
Just a quick question again. Thank you for attending. I'm used to be on BPAC years ago, so I'm back recently. Is there any plans to continue the Watch for Me NC program? I know my first time on BPAC, typically around November, we did a series of events, and I know that's a DOT run program.
I don't have an answer, but I can get an answer. So the question is there a continuation of the Watch for Me program?
Yes.
Okay. I can find out.
Thank you.
And it's best to follow. Heidi, Hannah, can I send that to you to send out to the group? Okay.
Yes to that. We have one anonymous attendee. I'm not sure if this was actually meant for me or for you, but what highways are bicyclists not allowed to travel on? I guess if you have a short answer to that, maybe.
It's a pretty short answer. Our controlled access facilities, we don't allow bicycles or pedestrians on those facilities. So your interstates are all controlled access facilities. What had been proposed for US 70 in Durham to convert it to a freeway, East End Connector is a controlled access facility, it's a freeway. Now, what we look for when we're developing that type of project, especially in a conversion project like US 70, is how do we make sure we have cross connection for bike ped transit, to make sure that the road doesn't become a barrier that you can no longer traverse from one side to the other. So those are challenges that are frequent along those type of corridor conversions.
Thanks, Brandon. And Landon, I'll leave it to you for the last question.
Thanks. Appreciate that. couple things that kind of tie in together. This is just a reflection of, we're currently in the process of reviewing a couple of street repavings that are happening within city limits. And in our kind of informal discussions in one of our subcommittee meetings, these questions kind of came up. What is the narrowest that a car lane can be? Is that based on speed limit? And then kind of a second part to that, because this isn't Fayetteville Street. This was a different street that we were looking at. I think it's University, that we were going to ask, because one of the discussions was like, oh, well, can we ask for a bike lane? Okay, cool. Well, what kind of bike lane can we ask for? And I believe one of our city liaison people made an offhanded comment about, well, you need at least 2 feet for a flex post to be included. Well, all right, how narrow can you make the car lane? And then if a ask that we were going to ask to the city council to ask on our behalf, because we can't make the formal ask, right? Like we have to pass that up the chain. Is there an acceptable buffer level where we could ask for some of those hardened protection things if we were going to put in a bike walk path or something? Is there ever an acceptable situation where we could ask for a fully protected, i.e. Jersey barriers, bollards, things that will stop a vehicle from entering into those facilities?
I think, when we look at that type of, what we did, like conversion of Irwin, right? A lot of that maintenance of those type of structures are going to fall on the locals. Anytime you're talking about a hard barrier, like a concrete barrier, Jersey barrier, my biggest concern there is the end, where those end. You've got to have certain treatment. You can have a blunt ending, but can they be designed appropriately? Potentially. Those barriers take up a lot more room than the flexible bollards or a quick curb type of installation. So I think it would be more challenging to take an existing footprint of a roadway. How narrow can a lane be? I think it's going to be case by case. Probably in most cases, we don't like to go below like a 10.5 foot, but it's going to depend on, I think it does depend on the volume of traffic, the potential existing speed limit out there. Maybe the speed limit needs to be evaluated with the change in what we're trying to do from I don't like to call it a road diet, I just like to call it a change in the corridor itself, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the thing is to be an advocate for wanting to see what could be done, and let us work with the locals on that, and don't rule anything out. I think that's where you got to come from y'all's end is to push for it, and then try not to let any opportunity go by. So I think that's great that y'all are seeing these future resurfacing routes and making comments on those routes. It's very important because that's some quick hits that we can have to make changes where we can.
Thank you,
We'll
Brandon.
start asking for fully Dutch style protect. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Nothing is off limits in principle. There's case by case, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Brandon. I appreciate, and honestly, I think would be lovely if we could do this more consistently between BPAC and I think we talk about NCDOT a lot, and would love to sort of figure out how to continue working together. And I know John Sanders in the attendees as well, and we often gets letters from us, but doesn't hear from us. Thanks, John, for being here. Appreciate you all. I'm going to be a little terse and move quickly. Brandon, other folks, feel free to sign off. We'll be moving through the agenda, but thanks for being here.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Brandon. Moving to committee reports, and we'll keep these even briefer than we've already asked. Suzanne's not here, so I'll do the Education, Encouragement, and Engagement Committee report.
Goodness. Javiera said in the chat that she needed to leave early, so
Okay.
she asked if she could be moved up. I don't know if you,
Oh, yeah.
where you want to put it, but
Javier, if you're available, feel free to give an update now.
Yeah, it would also probably help with the conversation that we just had, because I think all of it does tie together. Because I think one of the questions or one of the reasons that Hannah reached out and was like, "Can you be here tonight?" And I said yes. It's a busy time for me right now.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to be able to answer any questions that folks had, because I knew that and it was the Fayetteville Street and then being here for Brandon's presentation. So I just wanted to flag those three things before I hop off. Unless there's anything in the committee reports I need to hear, it's usually kind of internal work for y'all. And so doesn't,
Well,
There
maybe there's the one,
is-
Tricia had a comment, right? Maybe the
Mhm.
Tricia discussion, which we can maybe do that next. I know Nathan just raised
Yeah.
his hand, but let us know when you're done, Javier, and we can do the next one last thing that's relevant for you.
yeah, so I guess real quick I hope that the presentation was helpful for y'all to have a deeper understanding. Nathan said his hand was raised by accident.
We'll allow it.
So that, thank you, Nathan. So the point was to like help y'all have a better understanding. And I want to say, I apologize. I've been doing a pretty consistent job with Bike Durham, making sure that they're involved in MPO stuff, and John Talmadge and others are pretty consistently providing comment, showing up at meetings. They have paid staff, y'all don't, right? And the meetings are always during the day because it's professional meetings. It's our transportation department. It's various cities and towns. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for BPAC to weigh in. So one thing I know, Hannah, you have probably access to when they're asking for public comment on certain things. And then I'm trying to just share it out on my council Facebook page when I can, if I like get it up on time, to provide comment for like spot 7 or whatever else, so that there's the opportunity for y'all to weigh in. I think I think y'all have been coordinating with Bike Durham around Highway 70. That I just want to flag that as a project where, quite frankly, there's going to be a fight. And bike and multimodal folks, the folks who live over there want a freeway. That's I've engaged with those residents quite a bit. I think maybe some of y'all have too. So I just want to flag that as something that in the next few months, as we do this other round of engagement, I think up to 50 small businesses would be impacted in a negative way if it was converted to a freeway. I think the impact of that is significant. So I just want to flag that as a thing that I want to ensure that BPAC keeps engaging on. And then just raising the MPO in general is a good space. And also, we're already, so our MTP 2050 plan, which Brandon highlighted, it really narrows the focus on road expansions. But we're already getting pressure, like not last month, but the month before. There was pressure to accept these road expansion projects, even though it was counter to the policy. So that's going to just keep coming up. And so our advocacy orgs are going to have to help us as electeds just keep pushing on this. We've got to have a different future. And I think that Brandon and others do a really good job. They engage with us at the MPO in a really great way. But there's obviously a culture and mentality that tends in NCDOT that it's just what it is. We're just, it's not like to make it adversarial or not. I just think that the goals and intentions are very different than what you're going to find in the city of Durham's transportation department and advocacy orgs or advocacy groups like this. And so, and the state funding doesn't help, right? So those are just the big challenges that we're going to consistently face, which is one of the reasons that an infrastructure bond to me makes like let's just take our roads, because to get a different general assembly and to get different funding, like all of that seems like a longer, yes, important project. But one thing we can do is work to get an infrastructure bond soon in front of voters and get those dollars deployed in a much quicker way. Because I think y'all were aware, in our CIP this year, $40 million is going to sidewalks, right? A significant amount of dollars is getting put in infrastructure, and good infrastructure, sidewalks, connectivity, transit, et cetera. And it's still not enough. To the resident who was here earlier, that sidewalk gap, that's not anywhere identified on any city project as a priority right now. That doesn't mean it's not important to that community and those residents' lives. It's just the reality of resources, like fixed resources. So those are all my comments. Let me know if there's questions. Let me know what you need from me on Fayetteville Street.
Thank you, Javiera. I'll just say, current residents may want a freeway, but there are going to be a lot of future residents on US 70s that don't get to speak up today. Well, let's move to the Plan Implementation and Evaluation Committee. I know we're going to be jumping around, but that way, Javier, we'll have the discussion specifically that the one thing I would like for, I think, you to be here for. Mike, if that's all right, I'm pulling you forward, and Tricia, you can be ready to take over to discuss the sidewalks.
Yeah, I'm gonna fly through this and hand it off to Tricia, so we can go ahead and get into that. A couple of these things we discussed are up for new business anyway, which we went over the bike co-op letter, which we'll discuss, and then we also talked about letter for Fayetteville Street, which will come up too in a little bit. We went over the BPAC.
Mike, I think we lost you. Does anyone else hear him?
No.
Later on, maybe that's something each committee needs to talk about a little bit.
Sorry, Mike, you're cutting in and out a little bit.
Oh, I did. Sorry. So anyway, a couple letters that we talked about were bike co-op and then Fayetteville Street, which will come up for new business in just a little bit. We talked about the pie description for the flyer, and that's on the Google Drive for people to go in and give comments and try to make that more concise, maybe a little more descriptive even of what we have. But we went over the UDO recommendations. There's a draft online for those too on the Google Docs. We made some additions to that. And then Tricia came in. We spoke about the sidewalks to school bond measure. And that's where she wanted to have some discussion tonight about that. So if you're ready, Tricia, I'll go ahead and hand that off to you.
Sure, thanks, Mike. And kind of the long and short of the bond measure is there are sidewalk gaps. If we want to keep it very narrowly focused, we can look at the sidewalk gaps in the areas within like a half mile or so around schools, and we could keep it at that and focus on that. There are other bonds in like Raleigh and Apex, and I'll put the Apex one in the Q&A because that's the one that I think looks really good and has a really clear depiction of where there's need. They have a really good map of where sidewalks are, where they are not, where they are proposing them, which builds into the request for the bond, you know, how much and where the money's going to go. So it's really user friendly. So that's something that I would love to see Durham do. The thing that complicates it is that there are a number of sidewalk gaps on NCDOT roads, which are not owned by the city. And DOT doesn't put the sidewalks there because they're not new projects. The county doesn't have a department or budget really for sidewalks. So the question becomes, you know, if we do a bond for the city, how do those gaps get filled? And Javier, maybe that's to your point of the, you know, does the city then take over those sections of DOT road and have ownership and then maintenance of that? I don't know if any other DOT folks are on, because I had a question in looking at the map from Apex. There were 2 sites that look like they created sidewalks on NCDOT roads. So I was gonna propose those to the DOT folks and see, you know, who is currently maintaining those. But I don't know, are any DOT folks left?
I see John is still in the attendees, but I'm not sure if he'll be able to answer. But John Sandor, but if John is able to, maybe you can pose the questions in the Q&A. We can copy them and make sure that we at least bring them up in an email after.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't know if Heidi's also on, because we had questions about, you know, if the county does any work with that. But yeah, I guess if Heidi's not here, Javier.
Heidi is here, yeah.
Okay.
Heidi's here. Ellen, I don't think is though, but Heidi is, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the question we had for you, Heidi, was currently, if there's an issue around public works in the county, where does that go? Because we're thinking, you know, this kind of thing would go into that same bucket, but what is the public works entity that helps the county out currently?
with sidewalks?
No, just general public works. Like, is there a parallel entity within the county that
We
is?
have general services, I guess, would be the parallel entity. They do nothing with sidewalks though, but I'm not really sure what you're asking.
Right, I'm asking if there's a way we could utilize the public works parallel in the county to potentially address some of these issues, right? Like, so how do people who live in the county and not the city get some of these issues addressed? That was a question that came up in PI that we wanted answered, and we needed to have county representation for that. So I guess that, Dennis, was that?
Yeah.
What we were
Well,
thinking?
I thought Ellen had a great answer to that. Ellen Beckman, the one transportation staff member that the county has. And her recommendation, after talking with city staff, she used to work for the city, so she knows people really well. And I think she is a really good collaborator across city, county government. Her suggestion was that, and this is coming from staff, is that, BPAC and others, our staffs, get together and really look at what would be a framework for decision making around this kind of issue, and for funding and for implementation. Really during the update of the bike and pedestrian plan, which it sounds like is supposed to be coming forward, or maybe you all already have that on your agenda, or Ellen's going to recommend it, but she keeps mentioning that's about to happen. And she said in her mind, her advice to us would be that's the time to evaluate needs, priorities, recommend funding options, establish policies to address this kind of thing.
I think that's the right next step is probably to just get the sort of different parties into one room and talk about this, because it is actually directly relevant to May's point earlier, right? It's this sort of interesting cases where the developer is not building the sidewalk, the city's not building the sidewalk, and the county doesn't seem to build sidewalks, and NCDOT doesn't build sidewalks. So you have this problem, right? And I think Trisha's question was kind of thinking about, like, how does the school get like sewage set up, right? In a way, can we leverage like the fact that some utilities have to go outside of the city limits? We should think of sidewalks as a utility in that sense, and maybe we can talk like how public works, if you were saying, but if they're not, what was the part that the public works sort of equivalent at the county level again?
Well, I was mentioning general services, but maybe a closer counterpart would be, like our water facility plan out in the county, our sewer and water facility. But that, I only thought of that because of your reference to how do the schools get sewer if they're outside the county.
And I mean, it's just sort of it's just a thinking about the sort of scope of the problem, and like how do things get handed off from the city to the county, and maybe there's an avenue there. I'll throw in Nathan's question from the chat, which is I think it's a more creative idea for this future discussion, but does NCDOT have to consent if we want to give them a road to maintain? Could we, in theory, could Durham take over the right of way, build a sidewalk, and then give it back to NCDOT? So
no, in general, I think anything we're spending money on, the city's just going to want. Like, that's just right. Like, because then we want to have control over it. Because like, then we're giving control back to NCDOT, and it seems like we're kind of back into this, like, to the point around Fayetteville Street. If we own Fayetteville Street, it wouldn't really matter what the level of, if we made our commitment and that's what we wanted to do, then that's what we do, regardless of whatever other thing. So I think that was a good point. And I'm pretty sure Fayetteville Street is one of the roads that's identified in that Move Durham study that got done. There was like 6 identified corridors that were critically important for transit, really. And that was one of the corridors. So yeah. Yeah,
thank you, Javier. Mary Rose mentions the bike ped implementation plan is expected to start in November, December, and be completed through the spring. Jeff, you have your hand, and Landon, and we'll make this quick. We might have to ask.
Yeah,
for 10 more minutes.
just a very quick thought, kind of on Nathan's creative thinking. I know in Durham that the city maintains sidewalks, which I know is an issue because that comes out of the budget. There are some cities in the United States where the property owner is responsible for maintaining the sidewalk. I don't know if that's something that Durham could legally do. I don't know the laws in North Carolina, but that might be something that if the property owner had to maintain the sidewalk, that would relieve that responsibility from the city, and they'd be able to build more new ones.
Yeah.
Like,
I
for instance, in
appreciate
New York City, if you have a sidewalk in front of your house, you're responsible for maintaining it. The city will inspect it and make sure that it's up to safety standards. And if it's not, and you don't fix it, they'll fix it for you and they'll bill you for it, which I know politically might be, you don't want to necessarily anger property owners, but that might be a way to help maintain existing sidewalks and let the city build new ones.
I appreciate it, Jeff. We'll have creative thinking. We'll talk about this at Pi next month for sure. Landon,
John?
your hands. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, John Sander said in the chat that there are examples of municipalities maintaining sidewalks in county under an agreement.
Yeah, I think that sort of agreement is what we're hoping to think more about. What does that entail? Landon, you had your hand up, but
yeah, I'll be very quick.
Okay.
This is for Javiera. There's a question. The BPAC's in the process, and I'm sure you'll get this. The letter drafted to comment on the Fayetteville Street, the decision by NCDOT. One of the bullet points we had was the repeated disinvestment in the neighborhood, specifically around transit and how sometimes the wrong kind of investment has been in there. One of the things that I was thinking about was that all of the new residents that are going to be added to this, specifically related to the Fayette Place development by the Durham Housing Authority, is that project still moving forward? And can we plausibly use that line in the letter as a point of emphasis for lower income individuals who need access to facilities so that they can access different parts of the city? Because I know that is a large parcel on Fayetteville Street that's been a priority for the city to develop. And I hadn't seen anything recent on that. So I just wanted to make sure that was still moving forward and in some capacity before we included that as a bullet point in this overall letter.
Yeah, as far as, yes, Fayette Place is still moving forward. And then there's a large South Side Round 3 is coming forward. And then there's where the Food World is.
Yes.
There's a large project that's going there. So the only reason I know about the Fayetteville Street thing is because of emails that I've seen from BPAC going back and forth around it. So that's as much as I know. I did not go to MPO last month, nor did I have my MPO. So MPO folks meet with transportation folks before to prep for the meeting. So I don't know if it would have come up in that conversation because we also just get apprised of regular transit things that are happening. So it will be interesting. Like I don't understand what is going on there. To be perfectly candid,
we don't know if it's because his Brandon's thing was he said something about traffic backing up on 147.
Yeah, but you could start I don't know.
The other thing that was mentioned in the DevRev meeting when we brought this up was the potential project at the Food World. We didn't know whether it was the developers making hay over.
I doubt it. I mean, I know the developers on that project the direction to the developers on that project were tread very carefully because of the community that you're in. And I don't understand what the bike, like, why couldn't you ride it down the road in front of the Food World and then pick it back up on Roxborough? Like, fine, you don't even have to cross the bridge. Like, if the issue is the safety of 147, which I get, like, that's not illegitimate. When Brandon said that to me, that's a legitimate concern, right? People are turning off and on, they're not going to be paying attention, blah, blah, whatever. But couldn't you just route it down, like when we do these alternative bike pedestrian, like these boulevards that we're doing anyway, couldn't you route it down a neighborhood street that isn't going to cross that bridge and then have it pick up on the other side of 147? That's just from my point of view. Because further down Fayetteville, it makes so much sense to have also we're putting so much emphasis on that. That's one of our main Go Durham bus routes, right? Like, we're putting a lot of emphasis on bus frequency and reliability. That was part of the Better Bus Project, right? That study that we did. The city's about to, we're putting $10 million worth of investment in that corridor. So, yeah.
Yeah, and Javier, I think we've not even in our letter begun to suggest alternative, like, partial implementations. We just sort of expressed our concern with, like, the just kind of abrupt halt with not. Anyway, we'll send you the letter, and we're going to go through it in a moment here, if that's all right. And I know you have to leave early; it's barely early, but I do want to.
Yeah, I'm gonna hop off unless there's a question for me from Trisha. I don't think so. I don't think we just because it's our road, we annex all of the property. That would be different. That was for Trisha's comment in the group. Thanks, y'all. I'm sorry I have to drop off early. It's good to see y'all.
Thank you, Javier. I will move to Triple E, and I'll prepare that we might need to ask for 10 more minutes, but we'll do our best. So Triple E this month mainly talked about sort of social media presence, thanks to like Andres being willing to kind of take on a little bit of sort of ownership of that process. And we'll actually start maybe even this month with emailing before we do social media. We have an email list that we'll start to activate after this meeting. Roxborough Street is actually the main thing we talked about, which was based off the walk audit we did in the community meetings. We're talking about doing a sort of presentation to summarize our findings on North Roxborough, which are also relevant for the repavings that are going to happen there. NCDOT is doing a repaving on North Roxborough and on Mangum. So we talked a fair amount about that, and we'll have more updates on that next month. And we also talked about the People's Vision transportation campaign, which was the from Bike Durham. John Talmadge was there, and we'll talk in a moment actually about the Week Without Driving as well. So I'll leave that for Triple E. And Scott, if you don't mind giving us a brief version of the DevRev update. Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
I hate to disrespect the DevRev members by trying to shove this into like a minute or two, and I have something I would like to share. I'd like to make a motion, since we are now 22 minutes behind schedule. I'd like to make a motion to add 20 minutes to the meeting, please. Okay, Landon second.
See Landon seconding. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Hearing ayes. Any opposed? All opposed. Okay, the motion's approved. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Darn it, I hate when this happens. Okay, so here's my report. We had 6 people at the meeting, thanks to Brian and Landon in particular for reviewing site plans. So 3 of us reviewed site plans during the month, and also Marissa, I think she's a new member on BPAC. She attended and expressed interest in joining DevRev. So we reviewed 6 plans. I'm just going to go through these super quickly, just to give you an idea of the kinds of plans that we're seeing and kind of what's coming in and what we're saying about them. So 1503 Camden Avenue, it was 21 acres, and they wanted to change light industrial to industrial. It's near the intersection of I-85 and 885. However, it's also near the Durham Rail Trail, the Ellerby Creek Trail, and the Roxborough Trail. And so our requests there were to have a 12-foot multi-use path, MUP, to the Roxborough Trail, which I don't believe is built yet, and then have covered bike parking and a bike fix-it station, since it's going to be near all 3 of these trails. So that one was an industrial one. Not sure if that will be accepted or not, but we're asking for it. The next one is Alford Tract, which is a rural residential tract of 13 acres on Sharon Road near NC 98, and they want to change that from rural residential to residential and build 100 units of apartments or townhouses. What we asked for there was a 12-foot multi-use path along Sharon Road, and there are 2 other neighborhoods that are nearby, and so we want a connection to those with a 10-foot multi-use path. I'm leaving out some of the details, but these are the highlights of what we're asking for. The next one is on Fayetteville Road, and it was 32 acres. Once again, rural residential to PDR 12, so residential, and they want to build 300 units. This is down south near the intersection of 751 and Fayetteville Road. And so what we requested there was a 12-foot multi-use path along 751 and add a bike lane on Fayetteville, build a crosswalk on Fayetteville and this road that's going to be built called Swift. And there's an adjacent neighborhood that we wanted to connect to, and a planned new neighborhood on the north. And so some of these, like Fayetteville Road, is targeted for bike lanes in the comprehensive plan. So that's why we're asking for some of these things. Next one is on Leesville Road, and it's a 30-acre plot. Once again, rural residential to build 300 apartments and 100 townhomes. And so this is off US 70, one of the roads we've been talking about quite a bit, near Page Road. And what we asked for there was protected bike lanes on Leesville, 12-foot multi-use path, easements for future developments that are in the works on the north, east, and west sides. And then there's a future trail called the Chunky Pipe Trail. We want a right of way to get to that. The next one is on Cornwallis Road, 2 lots there. It's 15-acre request to change residential to commercial neighborhood to build a retail landscaping / hardware hardscape business that'll have a building and some storage there. And this is near the intersection of Cornwallis Road and MLK at US 70. I mean, sorry, it's NC 55. That's a typo there. And what we asked for there's already some sidewalks and stuff there, but there's not a sidewalk along East Cornwallis Road from this property to an existing sidewalk that we asked for. The developer actually said no, and we're asking for it again. And finally, the last one was on Chin Page Road, and it's a 2.5-acre small plot that they want to change both of the little plots to light industrial. And this is next to an RTP business called Wolf Speed. And so we asked for a protected bike lane along Chin Page Road because it's in the comprehensive plan for one, multi-use path along Chin Page Road frontage and connecting that to a sidewalk on Wolf Speed property. So this gives you an idea of what kinds of plans we're looking at. And many of these are rural residential that want to be changed into residential. You can see, East Durham, is where a lot of them are, where there's these tracts of farmland that are going to be converted into residential. The second big thing we did was we reviewed some updates to the development review cheat sheet that were submitted by Dan Clever to make references to the Durham Comprehensive Plan. So when we're making the suggestions or requests that we're making during these development reviews, that we can identify the like chapter and verse of the comprehensive plan where these changes are asked for. And so it just gives us a little bit more weight to the comments that we're making. All right, that's my presentation, and I'll stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. That's a really, I appreciate that. And moving forward, it's going to be great to hear the sort of the details of these reviews. Heidi, thanks for sticking it out with us. I'll move to you with the county if you have any updates.
I don't have any report for you all tonight.
Okay. Thanks. Nathan with Duke. Yeah, please.
Now that the students are back in town, the consultant hired to update Duke's bike ped plan has actually started to send out their survey and whatnot to everybody. It's been in the newspaper and in random newsletters that we get emailed. Hopefully people are reading those. I don't, so I don't have a lot of hopes, but I've been spreading the link to as many people as I can. And that's all that I know for Duke.
Okay. Thanks, Nathan. Any other community updates?
Mary has her hand raised.
Oh,
yeah.
Mary.
I was just going to add that Duke University Bike Ped plan is available for anyone in the community to respond to. And currently the deadline for survey responses is October 11th. So we're all welcome to do that, and I can add the link for it in the chat.
Thanks. And let's, if you don't mind emailing it as well, or we can just make sure that gets in the email threads. Thanks. Any community updates? I'll just mention briefly, Trisha and I were at the sort of Vision Zero monthly update that we do sort of, and we discussed actually sidewalks outside of city limits, inside of county limits, sort of on state-owned roads. And we have some connections that we might pursue, and we'll talk more about in a future PI meeting, but that was an interesting conversation that we'll talk more about at the committee. All right, so old business, we have presentation topics for upcoming meetings. I'm gonna sort of leave it to the chat if you all have thoughts about ideas for upcoming presentations, people that you'd like to focus on. for next month, please feel free to mention, but I'll keep moving just to maybe give us back some time. And we move now to the letters. I'll share my screen, and what I'm going to do, because and Mary, your hand's raised, but just let me know, interrupt me if it's still something new. So yeah, here we go. My messages, okay. Sorry, let me make sure I have it up here. There we go. So I'm going to read through these, and I'll be quick, but please maybe throw your questions into the Q&A if you have any. But I do want to read through them just to make sure everybody has a chance to sort of get the full content of what the letters contain. This is the letter that we are planning to sort of vote on regarding the Fayetteville Street Bike Lanes project. And I'll sort of split out into sections. So on NCDOT's unacceptable retraction of approval on the planned bike lanes on Fayetteville Street. The Fayetteville Street Bike Lane project has been under development since 2018 with funding secured through a congestion mitigation and air quality improvement program grant by NCDOT. The project would add bicycle lanes in the portion of Fayetteville Street that crosses the Durham Freeway, stretching from East Umstead Street to Main Street. With the designs for this project having long been approved by NCDOT and work expected to begin this fall as of August 2023, NCDOT has halted this project due to traffic congestion concerns projected for 20 years from now. The high cost of last-minute cancellation. NCDOT's decision to reverse this prior approved plan was a surprise that immediately halted the project, the work for which has already been contracted. Canceling this project will cost Durham taxpayers thousands of dollars. Besides the potential lost design work on the bicycle lanes that would not be implemented, canceling this project will require using city funds instead of federal grant funds to update previous designs for improved pedestrian crossings at the intersections of Fayetteville Street and East Lakewood Avenue and the intersection of Fayetteville Street and East Umstead Street. These intersections were to be incorporated in the project, and if Fayetteville Street is removed from the project, the city will have to implement any updated designs separately. These pedestrian improvements are critical for safety. One need only sit for a few minutes at the bus stop at Fayetteville Street and East Piedmont Avenue to see how often pedestrians are crossing Fayetteville Street all along this corridor. Because NCDOT has not provided any new evidence or findings regarding existing or future conditions, it is difficult to predict how any new or reopened concerns may be addressed to a satisfactory resolution. The lack of transparency in NCDOT's decision-making process has negated years of successful collaboration between stakeholders, the city, and NCDOT to make Fayetteville Street safer for pedestrians and bicyclists. Concerns of congestion are not well-founded. Concerns about a projection of future level of service is not by itself sufficient evidence to cancel multimodal improvement projects. The Federal Highway Administration itself states that the existence of LOSF condition does not by itself indicate that action must be taken to correct the condition. And citing that, and then that is cited to the Federal Highway Administration. There needs to be some justification given for why the street needs to be prioritized for car traffic over pedestrian and cyclist traffic. If we assume 1.5% growth every year with no consideration to other factors, then no street would ever qualify for a road diet or support bicycle lanes. The assumption of 1.5% yearly growth on average annual daily traffic is fundamentally flawed. The AADT counts along this portion of Fayetteville Street show that this growth projection cannot be universally applied. Over the last 20 years, while Durham's population has grown 50%, AADT on this corridor has remained the same, and that's cited. BPAC believes that transportation demand is induced by supply. And if there are more safe bike lanes built and better transit service provided, that will impact the level of service and the real experienced congestion of roadway users more than the number of lanes given to cars. What happened to Vision Zero? In 2015, NCDOT declared North Carolina Vision Zero state. Cited. Given an opportunity to take another step towards this goal with no cost to the state due to funding being acquired through the CMAQ program grant, NCDOT has chosen to halt this project. 8 years after this commitment, BPAC would expect NCDOT to provide a better justification for why it has decided to go back on its prior approval and postpone real action towards Vision Zero. Does NCDOT project the number of expected deaths and their correlation with level of service on roadways that interface with pedestrians and cyclists? The only reason to prioritize level of service over the implementation of multimodal accessibility would be the cost incurred by the implementation. BPAC believes the expected cost of life for different build options should be included in this calculation and provided with any cost estimates. Repeated disinvestment in the neighborhood. The Hayti neighborhood is the epicenter of the devastation caused by urban renewal projects and the construction of the Durham Freeway in the 60s and 70s. The portion of Fayetteville Street this portion of Fayetteville Street crosses Durham Freeway and is the part of the Hayti district that was most cited. We cannot ignore this history and any hesitation to invest in mobility options for the Hayti neighborhood in service of others who drive through this community resembles far too closely the same mistakes made decades ago. Beyond Hayti and the city's historical treatment of the community, the neighboring area has a high proportion of low-income families and university students, with consequently some of the lowest rates of car ownership in the entire city. Roughly 10 to 25% of the brightening population, depending on the census tract, live further than a half mile from a grocery store and don't have access to a personal vehicle. Protected bicycle lanes along this corridor would serve as a crucial lifeline for members of the community accessing basic amenities both in Hayti and the downtown area, cited. Conversely, a lack of protected bicycle lanes along the Fayetteville Street corridor only blocks residents from accessing an otherwise pedestrian and cyclist-friendly downtown Durham. As our community grows rapidly and requires new infrastructure to accommodate alternative methods of travel into and within the downtown area, the city must ensure that all neighborhoods have equitable access to these developments, particularly those that have been historically neglected from Durham's economic successes. For the reasons stated above, BPAC believes that the last-minute halting of the Fayetteville Street bike lane project is a significant mistake and requests NCDOT to reconsider their decision and to provide further context on their decision-making process. Thank you all for bearing with me. Any questions, concerns?
Yeah, this is Scott. I've never read this before. Thank you. To me, the call to action is weak. I mean, we don't want them just to reconsider and give us some answers. We want them to change us back to the way it was. And so I think we should, put that in as a request or demand, I think we got a great build up to that with all the citations and data and, argument there. And I just feel like the call to action needs to be stronger.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to note these and and we may vote on the freedom to do an edit on a couple sentences after. Any other points to be brought up?
Kind of along those lines, just adding something that sort of indicates don't do this again. Like any other future projects that are along NCDOT corridors, we don't want to have to go through this process again of waiting at the last minute or waiting until NCDOT just decides we can't do a project. Because of aforementioned issues.
Yeah, that's a good point. And just on Scott's, it was also reverse decision. Like this is how strong it should be. Like
restore the original.
Restore the original. Yeah.
I agree 100% with Scott. The ask at the bottom, actually ask is not strong enough a word. The demand has to be to reverse the decision.
I think I'm on board with that. Anyone? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think all of that, and I know I say this a lot, but maybe we need to summarize and put that ask at the top of the letter, because it is a very long letter with a lot of points to it, which all need to be there. So you can say it twice.
Yeah, no, that's a good point for a long letter. We can kind of it's just technical, right? Just restate it at the front, stronger ask. I think that's fine. Anyone who doesn't agree with the points that have been brought up so far, it's an open space. I don't want to assume we're single-minded. I see a chat. I'm sharing it a little harder. So I think we might do some tweaking to that text after. Are there any other concerns about any of the sort of statements made? There's some strong statements. I think they reflect the conversations we've had in our committees for the most part. Then what I'll do, and I can take guidance from people who've been on the commission longer, but I think it's okay for us to do this rewording for just these last couple sentences after the fact with an email sort of to make sure that we are reflecting what we vote on today, right? What we're going to vote on today is the sort of stronger call to action, specifically that the original decision should be restored. And we shouldn't have to, like, future projects shouldn't be susceptible to this kind of last minute change.
So with that, I'd like to move that we approve the letter to be sent with the delegation to the chair to make edits as we discussed.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Not seeing, not hearing anything. All right, this letter is approved. Thank you all. And we'll send emails just on the finalization of those couple sentences. So this next one is for a rail trail study that we're sending to Secretary Buttigieg if we vote on it. Dear Secretary Buttigieg, on behalf of the Durham Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, I'm pleased to submit this letter of support for Durham County's fiscal year 24 Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods program for the Durham to Roxborough Rail Trail Planning Study. The Durham Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission is a joint city and county appointed citizen advisory board that advises the City Council and the Board of County Commissioners on matters relating to the development of trails and other appropriate recreational and transportation facilities for pedestrians and bicyclists. The Durham County application is for $500,000 to conduct a planning study focused on the feasibility, benefits, cost, and impact of developing a non-active rail corridor into a multi-use trail. This trail will provide a bicycle and pedestrian connection between the city of Roxborough, Person County, Durham County, and the city of Durham. This study will be a joint city and county effort focused on the 18 miles of rail corridor in Durham County and will complement a feasibility study already underway in Person County. Our commission supports this application because this trail is a long-standing community priority. The trail corridor was originally realized in the adopted 2001 Trails and Greenway Plan for the city and county of Durham, and the trail was reaffirmed through public engagement activities conducted in partnership with BPAC during the adoption of the more recent 2011 Trails and Greenways Plan for the city and county. The study will further strengthen and build upon regional partnerships, as it will be a joint effort between the Durham County Transportation Department and the City of Durham Parks and Recreation Department, and complements a feasibility study underway in Person County. BPAC fully supports the community engagement approach in the city's blueprint for equitable community engagement, which activates local partners and community networks for guidance on the project, and the process for this trail planning study will follow that blueprint. The city and county are committed to ensuring that those most affected by the trail have the opportunity to participate in the planning and design process. The trail will provide a high-quality and separated bicycle and pedestrian facility through a historically disadvantaged area of Durham, including the Bragtown neighborhood, a prioritized community within the city's equitable and green infrastructure program. The trail will improve access to transit on Go Durham Route 9, 9A, 9B, employment centers in downtown and northern Durham, and community resources such as multiple schools, the Bragtown Library, and multiple parks and conservation areas. The bicycle and pedestrian facility will provide an option for residents to replace vehicle trips with walking and cycling trips, reducing congestion and pollution. The trail will be a northern extension of the Durham Rail Trail, currently under development by the city of Durham. It will provide access to downtown Durham and the network of trail, bicycle facilities, and sidewalks in central Durham. The trail provides a transportation and recreational resource in rural northern Durham County, an area with very few sidewalks or bicycle facilities. The 18-mile trail will be one of the longest trails in the Triangle and is expected to attract a multitude of users, boosting tourism and recreation-based economic development. With the Downtown Rail Trail and American Tobacco Trail, it will provide more than 30 miles of continuous trail through Durham County. Our commission strongly supports RCN funding, the Durham to Roxborough Rail Trail Planning Study, and we look forward to participating in a successful study that helps advance this transformational project. Thank you all. Any questions or comments about this? If not, I'll take a motion.
I'll move to approve the letter.
This is Brian, I'll second.
I think that was Jeff who moved and Brian seconded, right? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Hearing ayes. All opposed? Not hearing, not seeing anything. Thanks all. This letter is approved. Oops. Okay, this one is our bike co-op support letter. So this is from the context of last month's meeting, where is it Michelle, right? Yeah, I think came to our meeting and discussed their ask for an updated contract from the city of Durham. Dear Mr. Walcott, who was the assistant director of the planning and development, or planning and development role at the Durham Parks and Recreation Department. Dear Mr. Walcott, the Durham Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission is a citizens group whose purpose is to advise Durham City Council and Board of County Commissioners on bicycle and pedestrian issues. This commission provides this letter in support of the Durham Bike Co-op's DBC request for a decision regarding their request for a new lease by January 31st, 2024 or sooner. BPAC would like to emphasize the need to support organizations like DBC in order to promote bicycle adoption and safety, which helps Durham become a more sustainable, safe, and comfortable place to live. DBC volunteers support the broadest possible spectrum of Triangle residents. Members give valuable maintenance assistance that enables a large population of riders to participate in healthy outdoor recreation and own a low-cost means to travel to work. DBC has outfitted its Duke Park Workshop with a wide variety of bike repair tools, stands, parts, and an environment that allows new and experienced users to safely maintain their bikes. This citizen initiative is an important part of the larger area-wide effort aimed at improving public health and the environment. In 2022, various DBC programs returned more than 580 roadworthy bicycles to the community at large from the 1,124 bicycles the community donated to it. The time and work that DBC members contribute to helping Durham citizens benefits our community. Bikes are repaired, relationships are built, instruction is shared, and low-cost bike maintenance is accessible to all. DBC is able to provide low-cost assistance because the Parks and Recreation Department and the City of Durham have provided a low-cost contract for their work site at 1612 Acadia Street, immediately north of Duke Park. Significant investment of time and capital has been made in this property over the last 8 years to continue the mission of DBC, with over $70,000 raised for property maintenance and improvements. The current contract expires on March 31st, 2025. DBC is considering a series of capital-intensive property improvement initiatives, but these have been placed on hold pending a decision on the next contract. Continuing to work out of the Acadia Street location is a key factor in the long-term strategy and ongoing success of this co-op, so the DBC board has requested a decision by January 31st, 2024 or sooner. A new contract with a term of at least 10 years is welcome, and a longer contract is preferred. With a new contract in place, or a MOU outlining the city's intention, DBC can move forward on plans for property improvements and will continue to provide low-cost public assistance for bike repair and distribution. The alternative is the co-op will need to begin the search for alternate facilities that will provide the location cost and functionality needed to maintain the DBC mission. DBC's strong preference is to stay at the current site, as this site has a safe bicycle connection to the Ellerby Creek Trail. Please consider this request for a quick decision on the lease. Any questions, thoughts? If not, I'll take a motion.
Just one minor
Please.
point. This at the very end, your connection, that location has a connection to the Duke Park Trail, which sort of connects to the Ellerby Creek Trail, but I think that should say the Duke Park Trail, because that's the trail that's actually there.
Yeah. Which connects to the, do you think it's okay to phrase it like that, to the Duke Park Trail, which connects to the
I would just say
Ellerby
the Duke Park Trail. I would leave off the Ellerby Creek Trail, because the Duke Park Trail really doesn't directly connect to the Ellerby Creek Trail. And I don't want someone at Parks and Rec to say, well, that's not really true.
Right, they're inflating or something. I got you. If anyone knows otherwise, I don't know better than that, so that I'll take that at face value. Is that okay with folks? Yeah.
You have to cross Washington Street and go about 50 yards along it to make that connection.
Right. It's a technicality.
Yeah.
Sounds good. If there are no other questions, I'll take a motion on that.
I move to approve this letter. This is Brian.
I'll second.
Brian first, Jeff second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
And yeah, so I know we were sent this letter in advance. So I mean, we were sent all these in advance, at least the last three in full form. Is there a request? It's a relatively short one, but is there a request for me to read it? Otherwise, we can, if there's a willingness to make a motion, I can take it. This letter, just to read the title, Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods Program, City of Durham, This is about the Reimagine Durham Freeway. So asking the US DOT for funding to help fund the Reimagine Durham Freeway project.
We also
Also-
just hit 20 minutes over, so I don't know if you want to add more time to the clock or.
Yeah, I guess if I could take a motion for 5 more minutes.
Yep, I'll move to add 10 more minutes.
10 more, yeah.
I'll
Second.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, we'll move, and if you have to sign off, just let us know. We just need to keep a quorum. I can take a motion on this letter or a request to read it.
I'll move to approve it.
I'll second.
Second.
I got Nathan seconding and Jeff first. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed?
Aye.
I heard Andres say aye. So I'll take that as an aye. This is approved. Thank you all.
That was an aye, that's correct.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, and then so I already asked Andres to defer his update until next month. My understanding is there's not anything too urgent there. Just let me know otherwise, Andres. For committee communications, the only thing I wanted to say was essentially that we'll be planning to start outbound communication via emails to people who have given us their emails. So if each committee can just plan to provide maybe a 2-3 bullet, few sentence version of what they have done after their meetings, next month we'll try to sort of start that habit, and maybe also kind of a version of the agenda that we can send out to start to engage the public a little bit more consistently. But just the expectation that we'll have some sort of summarized version of our committee meetings moving forward, and a note on attendance. I think we've been doing better, but I appreciate everybody making sure that they are at least notifying if they can't show up, and trying to at least come to one committee meeting a month to make sure that we're sort of doing all the work that we can. Today, you can see there's a lot of work. Hannah, with the t-shirts?
Yeah, I was gonna try to share my screen, but my computer goes in shutdown mode on these meetings. It's too much processing. So I'll just put it in the chat, but basically ordered the t-shirts and the stickers, and they came in, ordered a total of 30. So when there's events that come up in the future and people volunteer, that's when you'll be able to get one of the shirts. And then either that time or if we have enough for the retreat, then we'll be able to give shirts then. But yeah, I'll try to put a picture of it in the chat. But that's it.
Thanks, Hannah. And then this is just our sort of sign off point. Durham, I think we'll learn more about the People's Vision for Durham's Transportation Future campaign that Bike Durham is kind of pushing forward with. We're talking with them in the Triple E committee. But relevant for this month, October 2nd through October 8th, I believe those are the days, is the National Week Without Driving. And we just wanted to make sure that everybody on our commission is aware. Bike Durham is sending out communication about it, but this is a sort of chance to kind of take a moment and think about whether we actually can do this. And if we can, we should try. And if we can't, sort of understand why we can't and think about that. I think, whether it's access, or it's because of certain privileges we have that we can go without a car and live sort of safely. These are things that I think I invite all of us to think about, and please do sort of in your own networks share this information about the National Week Without Driving. You should have an email from BPAC about that. If you don't, we'll make sure there's a reminder before it happens. Communication priorities for next month. I know Trisha and I are going to get together, or we'll email about the sidewalks, sort of conversation, continuing that for the PI meeting. I'll include May as well for just making sure we talk to May to see if she wants to follow up during the PI meeting as well. And then we'll send all these letters out to everybody. Any other communication priorities that I've missed?
Hannah say that we only have a week to comment on the Public Works resurfacing list?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, what? Yeah, I
Yeah.
forgot that wasn't in the agenda. Yeah, please, Hannah.
Oh, that was in the updated agenda.
Right,
So
I'm
I had
looking at the
sent
old
like,
one, huh?
yeah,
Okay.
so I sent that. So yeah, I was able to get an extension. It's going to be, so the comments are officially due October 6th, so the day after the PI meeting. However, if like the city doesn't get the comments until then none of the comments will really be looked at before the scoping and fee is done with the consultant, because that will probably be done before then. So if we're able to add the comments now, the sooner the better, basically. We'll still look at the comments if they come in on the 6th, but just the sooner the better, because then it could be kind of grouped in with the fee and scope and all of that around the project. So, and I added that on the Google Drive and the Pi folder, and it's ready for your comments. So just put them in. Oh, and put your name next to whatever comment you make, just in case there's like extra questions about what you're referring to.
I think the timeline is a little rough for us, but I think I invite everybody. We'll sort of email about this over the coming week. Maybe we can do an ad hoc kind of meeting. You said October what, 6th?
6th, yeah. So that's the day after the PI meeting. So the thought is that, I mean, yeah, can dedicate the meeting to that. But then if people have time before then, look at it and put in your comments, because those will be looked at before the scope and fee meeting.
Yeah, let's do that. Thanks for mentioning that, Nathan. I forgot about it. So
just to clarify, to get our comments to actually be included in the scope, we should still try to meet the September 26th deadline on this sheet.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
and then we can just submit more comments for the second headline.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And there's not like a ton of roads, because you'll see on the list that I kind of grayed out some of them. So I don't think it should take too long if you just look at it on your own outside of the meeting. But
thanks, Hannah. Mary Rose mentions, maybe Mary, you can email that to us as well, the Google Doc, or sort of when you have an idea of how to complete the week without driving. That'd be something that we could look at and share. Yeah, we'll talk about meetings for next month over email, but maybe we can think about doing one in person. That's a communication priority. Anything else from folks? Any announcements? Anything I've missed? And your grace for going 30 over, I appreciate it. We did a lot of important stuff today, and I think once this Fayetteville letter gets finalized, we send it out. I'd like for everybody to push it to your networks. I'm going to talk to the Vision Zero folks. Bike Durham, I know, is sort of ready to sort of hop on it as well. Andres, yes.
Yeah, so really quickly, because I know we're not operating with a lot of time. So the last letter that we approved, the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods letter, I'm not sure why we're sending that, because that is a grant that the city of Durham would have to apply for. Hannah, I don't know if that's anything that you can.
They are. That's why.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, it's a support, basically saying that like BPAC supports getting funding for this grant.
Oh, supports the proposal that's been
exactly
sent to. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, yeah, just wanted to make sure we were on the same page there.
Thanks, Andres. Yeah, I should have clarified that at the beginning. Yeah, those were the support letters for applications that the city are making already. All right, folks. Any last announcements? Okay. Appreciate it. Have a good night. You move to adjourn. We're gonna need
motion to adjourn. Night, everyone.
Thank you all. Look forward to your email.